Jan, thank you very much for inviting me. And thank you all for coming this morning. I have to say, one of the things that you'll hear me explain is how important life's purpose is to each and every one of us, and how when we fulfill our life's purpose, that's really probably the most powerful healing force that there is. When I was 7, my grandmother told me I would be a doctor. At the time, I wasn't about to argue, but it turns out that she was right. That was my life's purpose. And to be here in front of you and to teach, which is what the word doctor actually means in Latin, is healing me. So I am grateful that you are all here to share your stories, your lives with me at this time, because we are all connected. And as I'm going to try to help you, you're helping me. I also want to begin by dedicating this morning's talk to a friend of mine who passed away on Wednesday. Her name was Kitty. She was 90. She first came to me when she was 83, 7 years ago. Her doctors told her she had emphysema and didn't have very long to live. She actually drove herself to my house with an oxygen tank in the back seat of her car, wheeled it to my office, and we spoke, as I do with most of my patients, for several hours, I trying to understand her life and her story, her situation, and then trying to share with her some ideas about how she may proceed. What's clear to me is that Kitty's condition was a lot more than emphysema. She was a recovering alcoholic who, at the age of 50, 43 years before I saw her, became somebody she always wanted to become, which was a healer. And she recovered herself and dedicated the rest of her life to helping others through the process of addiction, and continued to work 2 jobs up until 83 with her oxygen tank. But when she was told she had emphysema, she was devastated, obviously. But as I said, I think her condition was much more than her disease, or at least what doctors said, because she had a full life. She had wound up healing the relationships with her children that were made difficult by her drinking up until that age of 50 when she recovered. And she was giving back. She was a force of nature. I actually looked at her and I said, I don't think you have emphysema. I think you have a wonderful life. That really helped her, apparently, because she wrote to me afterwards that she dumped the oxygen tank. And as I said, she continued to live for 7 more years, teaching, caring, giving of herself. She had several great-grandchildren that she shared her life with, and she died in peace with a lot of love around her. So I want to dedicate these words that I'm going to share with you to Kitty. The last conference where Jan invited me was at UC Davis Cancer Center. And I ended that conference with the following. I said, if I was a magician, and you came to me, and I had this wand that I could wave, and I can get rid of your ailment, your disease, now what would you do with your life? And that's where I want to begin, because it's in that answer that is where your healing is. And it's not for me to determine that. It's not for anyone to determine it other than for you to explore what that means and what your life purpose is and how you get back into the life that you were meant to live. That said, I understand what the word cancer means. Like Kitty's emphysema, it hit her like a brick. It knocked her over. She was panic-stricken. And I know this because as a physician practicing conventionally for many years, those words came out of my mouth. And I watched the faces of my patients when I told them that they had cancer. I understand what it looks like. My grandfather, both of my grandmothers died from cancer. I took care of all of them. I took care of hundreds of people who went through the phases of treatment and agony, their families, their friends. I tried very hard to deal with the medical establishment's limits and limitations. In a word, cancer sucks. At least that was my first impression, too. But I wasn't willing to accept that, quite honestly. I felt strongly deep in my heart that there was something more that we could do than to roll over. So I went back to school. I went back to other schools because medical school wasn't going to help me with this one. I went back to other training and systems of health and healing that explored the limitless possibilities of the human condition and the purpose of our lives. Almost all of them touched on the spiritual, because the fact of the matter is we are all born with a death sentence. And the idea is, what are we going to do with this life? Is still the primary focus. When I went back to school, I actually learned that there was a lot of other things that we can do. That's the good news. But I'm not going to be talking to you about swapping supplements for surgery or Chinese medicine for chemotherapy. I'm actually going to be talking to you about something that's along the lines of a paradigm shift, a whole other way of looking at your condition, a whole other way of looking at your life. But I'm not going to give up on your physical cure either in so doing, but I want to take a journey. I want you to take a journey with me into exploring another possibility. This new paradigm for health actually is a way to look at the human condition as to why we are here to begin with, why we face these challenges, what it means when we accomplish something, and what do we want to say about our lives when it's over. We're all going to face something that will kill us. The question is, what are we going to do until then? As you've heard already this morning, every one of us is on a healing journey. And I want you to think about cancer as your vehicle. See, I believe embedded in the challenge of what you're facing is an opportunity for growth and for learning. I actually believe that in this challenge, something good is trying to happen. And when we look for that, when we find the treasure that's waiting for us, we will understand it and will make meaning and peace with what we're experiencing. I also realize, because you're so quiet, that that's not easy. You are still reeling from what you have. This all sounds good, but it doesn't feel good. And as you know, most of the world out there, essentially all physicians, most of your family and friends, maybe your own bias, is that what you really need to do is go to war with this thing. Battle it, kill it. It makes a lot of sense because when you receive that diagnosis, all you want to do is get rid of it. And when our foundation is shaken, the way it is when we are sick, we go to the nearest base, security. In our culture, in our world, in the West in particular, that's the Western medical institution. And there we can often find a lot of support. But as you know, wars take a lot of energy, and in general, they are very destructive. Not only could you become exhausted, but in the process, your relationships suffer, your own life loses some of its luster, and even if you survive, the monster is always lurking behind the corner. I've seen that. So in fact, it's not easy because this is the reality. So you might feel resistance to a suggestion that there's another way to look at this whole thing. But stay with me, give me a chance to explain, please. Another worldview, one that transforms this war into a treasure hunt. The fact is, it's not a new paradigm. I think you might recall this one, make love, not war. Though cancer may be a motivator, an instigator, it doesn't necessarily need to be an enemy. Just think of some of the great revolutionaries of history: Buddha, Jesus, Gandhi, Mandela. There is another way. So first, I invite you actually right now, because I sense that there's going to be just difficulty making that leap, to close your eyes again and center and ground. I actually want you to explore the resistance that I anticipate you're feeling. Face it. Whatever is coming up by the comments that I've just made, the suggestions I'm making. Let that resistance rise and breathe into it. Breathe out. Relax. Nothing has changed yet. These are just words. But I invite you to find that other place where hope resides. And open that door, peer inside, and look through it in your mind's eye. Use your intuition. Can you feel something beyond? Perhaps a ray of truth in what I'm saying? That what you have is an opportunity for something really good trying to happen? So much for the AV. Okay, open your eyes. Let's try to find that doorway. The Anglo-Saxon root for the word health is halen. It means whole. The definition of health is not the absence of disease or cure or surviving. It's wholeness. If I had this graphic, you would see a 7-leafed flower, 7-petaled flower, with 7 zones of what I would say is what really defines our health. One of those clearly is our physical body, but there are others. Our mental, emotional state, our community, our relationship to nature, our relationship to other people, our relationship to the divine, our life's purpose. Those all are constantly interacting with each other, engaging in a spiraling, sophisticated array of activity on all levels, all energetic levels, the physical, the non-physical. What we experience right now in our lives is an amalgam of all of it. It cannot be separated. Only by convenience do we look at one thing or another at a time. But the truth is they exist simultaneously. And beyond that, we are not just isolated individuals. Even though we have individuality, we are single cells of a multicellular organism. We are actually connected to each other. When one suffers, we all suffer. When one heals, we all heal. So there's tremendous value in seeing health and the restoration of health in this model. Because very often what I find people do when they come to me for alternative medicine is give me the supplement. Is Chinese medicine or Reiki the answer to my dilemma? And I will tell you, they're all great tools, by the way. I often say yes. However, the idea is that by themselves, occasionally somebody has a magic wand, but very rarely does somebody really possess it. And that how we receive any treatment is like how a soil receives the seed. First, the gardener works the soil, making sure that the chosen plot of land is in the sun and gets adequate rain, deals with the minerals, the nutrients, and then maybe waiting for the right season, plants the seed. And seeds sometimes grow that year, and sometimes, like the log pole pines in Yellowstone, it takes a fire of 450 degrees for them to germinate. Reminds me of a little anecdote. In the 1980s, looks like most of you were around then. Remember those fires in Yellowstone? The first reports were this is a devastation. This is the end of this majestic area of the planet. I was crying. I had just visited Yellowstone for the first time in my life. I was a teenager, a couple of years earlier. And I really felt it. I'm very passionate about trees, by the way, so when I heard that story, I was really upset. It wasn't until 2 or 3 years later that they saw all this regrowth at the base of this charred remains of the forest. And then scientists figured it out. Oh yeah, they need 450 degrees of heat for these trees to actually germinate in the first place. That the park in which we so deeply loved was a result of fire, or at least was fueled and fed, nourished by fire. Fire, like cancer, is not necessarily the enemy. To heal, then, in this concept, is to improve the working relationship between all these different parts, not losing the forest, the entirety of your life, for the trees, your body. The trees are beautiful, but the forest survives. Your life will survive forever. That's not going to change. The disease that some doctor told you have does not change that. What's really interesting to me, as I studied this more and I started to practice it, to explain how I even got to this phrase, slow medicine, is that one of the things that actually ails us is this preoccupation with the physical, even when we know better. Intuitively, deep inside, all of our spiritual teachers tell us that what lasts is not the body, but our energy, our spirit. Yet, we stay relatively preoccupied with the body. And I can understand why you would do that. I really like chocolate. I like my body. I want it to stay around for a long time, but I primarily know I need to practice using it for good things. What I learned about slow medicine was that what seems to really ail the body and is the root cause of all diseases of the body is the fast, frenzied world in which we live, the one that keeps us distracted from the real purpose of living. The things that we are drawn to buy or consume, as nice as they may be in the moment, it catches us up in this experience that one might call sympathetic overdrive. The sympathetic nervous system in the locked-on position, fight or flight. We were staying at this inn, a block away. This morning, early in the morning, a car slammed into the back of Susan and Dallas's van. Things happen in this crazy world that stir us. And what's interesting is when we know this happens, every cell of our body suffers immediately when that happens. There's a purpose for the sympathetic overdrive or the sympathetic response. If you're chased by a lion, you'll run a little faster and you might survive. If a rock falls on your child, you'll be stronger and you can pick it off. Those are meant to be fleeting, isolated events. But we don't live in that type of world anymore. We live in a world where we're driving in traffic, where there's noise, where there's all sorts of information and energy thrown at us that we have to compartmentalize or we get overwhelmed. The fact is we are overwhelmed. Every cell of our body then experiences that overwhelm. It's not healing, it's the antithesis of healing. So if you want to heal, you have to turn that off. The simplest way to do it is to take a deep breath. Push the diaphragms down into your abdomen and stimulate the vagus nerve, and your body has this beautifully built-in, programmed off switch. That's why the practices these days of breathing techniques, meditation, contemplation, walks through nature, are spoken of as highly. They do work. So the idea is, in this fast, rush world, the treatment we really need is slow. So this is the reason that taking time to spend with your grandchild in the garden, or pursuing your passions and play with friends, these are the things that are actually healing, and don't underestimate how powerful they are. Along the way, actually, you'll find what's really important, and often you'll find the treasure. So let me tell you a story. I did share this in Sacramento, but I want to share it with you too. Another man that I saw was Stuart. He was 71 years old when he came to my office. He had metastatic adenocarcinoma of unknown primary, which basically means that he had cancer spread all around his body. Nobody knew where it really originated, other than it was a glandular tumor, probably from some intestinal organ or his lung, not sure. His doctors told him he had about 3 months to live, get his life in order, and he came to me because he wanted to know if there was an alternative treatment. So he asked about Chinese medicine and supplements. And I said, well, maybe. I said, but tell me a little bit more about your life. Well, Stuart was one of those people who was pretty obsessive compulsive, and so he had 3-inch binders filled with notes. What he really wanted to focus on was his medical condition, and that was the medical documentation that he brought with him. And he proceeded to go through it all with me. And I sat there for 3 hours. Part of the healing, by the way, is just to sit. How many of you have spent 3 hours with a doctor without being under anesthesia? So it is uncommon, but imagine if a doctor did that. I'm trying, by the way, to teach my medical colleagues this. There's a lot of resistance, as you can imagine, because time is one of those problems of our culture. Stuart shared his history of his medical condition. Was a couple of things. One, he did have this cancer. It was largely centered in his mid-abdomen, wrapped around his pancreas, his biliary tract, and involving his liver. He also was an alcoholic. He was drinking in my office, and he had cocaine in his nose. You would say he didn't take very good care of himself, which was really the root cause of his problem, not his medical condition, his life problem. Because what really was going on for Stuart was that he was angry. Because of his addictions, his ex-wife got a court order barring him from seeing his only child, a son who was at the time about 18 years old. He hadn't seen him in about 10 years, and he was really angry at his ex-wife for pursuing a legal action preventing him from seeing his son. They moved from New York to California, and he was really mad. The reason I know this is after the 3 hours, I did ask Stuart one question. I said, Stuart, what are you angry about? Which he didn't really talk to me up until then about that. But in Chinese medicine, the liver is associated with the emotion of anger. And when he kept talking to me about his liver and his alcohol, it was clear to me that he had liver disease, anger disease. And that's why I asked him that question, which opened up a flurry of emotion from him, rage, in fact. He cried in rage. The treatment plan that I designed for him was not supplements and Chinese medicine. In a word, or 2 words, it was anger management. It turned out that Stuart was not angry at his ex-wife only. He was angry at himself for the condition and the way he behaved. Ultimately, he was angry at his own father, who was 64 when he was born, one of the founders of General Motors, fourth wife, nanny raised him, barely saw his father. He was an orphan child, essentially. He wound up orphaning his own child through his own behavior. And this is not uncommon. He perpetuated a condition generation to generation. So the treatment plan was reconcile with your son. End that long line of pain. Stuart wrote letters every week. Was not returned at all. I said, keep writing. Stuart looked at that slow medicine wheel of health that you can't see, and he repaired other relationships. He wrote letters to his mother and father, no longer alive. He moved when he could. He got outside every day. He smelled the flowers. About 6 months in, his doctors, who, by the way, fired him because he was still drinking and abusing cocaine, and they didn't really want to care for him because he wasn't caring for himself, as sad as that is, the doctors, I mean. They did CAT scans anyway because they wanted to see his progression. Of course, CAT scans, you don't really need to see a doctor, and it's, I hate to say it, but it's very lucrative, so they still did that. And they saw that his tumors were regressing. There was no other treatment being given to him. In fact, Stuart was limping into my office with a cane when I first saw him. He was now moving about pretty freely. He was talking about making love to women. He was getting his life back together. He was living his life, which was my prescription. And his tumors were regressing. Another few months went by. It was now June, almost exactly a year after I first saw him. And I was going away on vacation, so I said I was going to say goodbye to him. I was seeing him weekly, by the way, which is not typical for me. I usually give people ideas and support them, but I don't need to see them often. But Stuart was in a position and really needed the support for me to see him very frequently. And I went to his house, by the way, to see him. And I was at his house, and I said, I'm going to say goodbye because I'm going away. I won't see you for a few weeks. And he said, no, you're not going to see me, which sounded very ominous to me. For some reason, I don't remember exactly why, but I just had this sinking feeling. And he quickly interjected and said that, no, he's going away too. He was going to the Bahamas to vacation. Actually, Bermuda, I'm sorry, where his family had a house, which he had always longed to go back to, but his disease prevented him from getting there. He said, I'm going there. I said, great for you. And as I was walking away, he said, one more thing. He said, my son called me. I said, wow, that's really pretty remarkable. He said, yeah, and he's coming to visit. And I went on my vacation, and he went on his. I was on a boat somewhere in the Mediterranean. I got a phone call. Stuart had died. I didn't really know at the time what happened. Again, if you remember, I wasn't surprised because I had some sort of premonition that I would not see him again. But I did hear about what happened at the memorial service. His son gave the eulogy. His son said, I am so happy that I got to know my father. He said, this is what happened on the last day of his life. I came over. We decided to take a ride a couple of hours away to visit old friends in the Berkshires. We're in his convertible. We trespassed on some property. The police came and chased us away. My father was smiling. We got to talk and reminisce and connect. It was an amazing day. We came home. He was walking up the stairs. He collapsed. The ambulance came, intubated him, and he ripped the tube out of his throat and died. You could say Stuart's life ended in death, and therefore somehow this whole treatment plan must have been a failure. But I will tell you, based on what his son said to me, was that no, the reclamation of the life of Stuart and his son was the purpose of his life. And he achieved it. His life was quite successful, and I think Stuart died with a smile on his face. As Jan said, we don't know how long we have, so every day is precious. A disease like cancer motivates us, for sure, to get our act together. But if we go to war with it, we might miss the opportunity to find peace, which as I said, my mind is more healing. And the opportunities and the treasure that the condition motivates us to seek and find. If we find it, we will heal, because we will return to wholeness. Parenthetically, this is how people live longer. This is what happened to Kitty. She was supposed to die in 2008. So there's a treasure out there, and if you spend just a little bit more time finding it, I think you're going to find that every day feels better. And when it feels better in your mind, in your heart, trust me, it's going to feel better in your cells. And every one of those cells is the ones you want to work for you, to deal with whatever you're dealing with on the physical level, whether it's receiving medications or radiation or surgery or dealing with the physical exhaustion, the anguish. These are all operated by cells on one level. And if you can restore their health by stimulating the parasympathetic nervous system, by finding peace, that's a good day. That's a really good day. And that's what I wish for you. So thank you. Do we have time for a question or two? So I'm happy to answer questions or for you to share thoughts about what I shared with you. I'm used to people challenging me, by the way, because as I said, I think that the idea that we've been approaching this one way that may not be the most effective way is a little jarring. The conventional wisdom is this is what you do. But how has that worked for us? And so, I think when I was prescribing antibiotics for strep throat, and 3 days later somebody called me and said, I'm fine, that's the beauty of Western medicine. When you're in pain, occasionally, there's value in the pills. But the idea is that's not sustainable. It's certainly not going to keep us on the course of our lives. And so I think, if we make peace, not war, or make love, not war, what we're talking about is loving our life and not losing touch with that, how important our life is and our life's purpose. Yes, Fran? No. Not until the day he died. Yes. So the question Fran asked was, did Stuart quit drinking? I thought about that when I first saw him. How am I going to handle this individual? And, I reached back into my heart and I said, I'm just going to care for him the best way I can. I'm not going to abandon him. I could have insisted, like his other doctors did, that he either stop drinking or I wasn't going to talk to him. But that to me felt very dismissive and insulting. This was an intelligent man who knew what he was doing, even though he may have been completely consumed by his addiction. So maybe in some ways he was a little out of his mind. But he didn't come to me for that. It was my sense. He was 71 years old. One thing I didn't want him to do was drive, so that I stopped. I made sure somebody was driving him around. But other than that, I sort of had to let that go. I sort of said to myself, maybe this is a utilitarian argument, I can't change it all. Maybe I can just help one thing. And once I saw that this was a legacy of pain from father to son, and my focus, as I said, because I think we're all connected, is I wanted that to heal. And I thought that that was possible by keeping the focus on that. So no, he kept drinking and using cocaine. Had a very interesting ritual. He was quite a man. Yeah. Right. So the question is, I'll repeat it, is pragmatic about how I can devote so much time to my patients. I do see them for usually 2 or 3 hours at a time. This is also a pragmatic decision. If I don't spend that much time, I can't help them so much. And so I chose at some point to either do it the right way or not do it at all. Oh, you could say, well, so I can only see 2 or 3 people a day. So you could say, well, then aren't you shortchanging so many of us who might need a doctor like that? That's why I wrote a book. That's why I'm happy to be in front of many people at one time, because I'm limited. But my life's purpose is to teach, and I have to listen first to be a good teacher. Yeah.
Are there doctors and health and medical who are responding to what you do? Are they more like you coming up behind it?
So the question is, how are other doctors responding to what I do, and are there others like me in the pipeline? I think the medical profession is slowly moving, but slowly. I think it's frustratingly slow. In fact, I think it's unconscionable. In fact, that many of my colleagues would not spend a little bit more time to ask a question like, how are you really? How is your life? How are you handling this? As if all that matters is their treatments. So I think that's a big problem. On the other hand, each and every one of us has the power to heal ourselves. And while we benefit from healers and healing modalities and substances, the greatest source of healing is in our own hearts. And that's what I think often is missing when somebody goes and abrogates any of their own power and authority to somebody else. Take care of me is okay for bits and pieces of time, but not as the dominant plan. And so I urge you to embrace this idea of love and peace for yourself. That just can't be underestimated how powerful that is. The medical profession, like other institutions, are crumbling now. They're crumbling because the transparency is revealing that there's a lot of corruption, inauthenticity, a lot of self-serving motives that don't serve us. So I would, quite honestly, not put so much emphasis into your medical doctor unless they get it. I hate to say that, but think of them as your mechanic. Your mechanic does not tell you where to drive your car. That's my answer. Yes? Yeah, so the question was what my background was, both in traditional Western medicine and beyond. And so I went to medical school at the University of Pennsylvania, and then after 15 years of practice, and in fact I was the medical director of a community hospital, and I was trying very hard through that authority to make changes in the culture, which I found very frustrating, as I just shared. So I sort of said enough of that, and I went back to school. I went to the University of Arizona, program in integrative medicine, studied with Andrew Weil, and basically was retooled And there I learned about many other modalities and systems of health and healing. But primarily, what I learned first was how to take care of myself, how to follow my own passion, how to address my own relationships, how critical that was to myself, including the relationship I had with me, starting there. Being really honest, looking in the mirror. But I learned a lot about other modalities. I don't practice them because that's not possible. Like if I wanted to practice Chinese medicine, it would be another 3 or 5 years of study. But I knew enough about when to refer people. But I still feel that those dots still need to be connected with an energy of love and spirit. That all the modalities in the world will not heal our lives. And so we need to be a participant in that journey. And we need to be the driver of that ship. Yes?
Would you like to comment on your Linchpin analogy?
Yes. So the question was, I had, in the previous conference, you must have been there, or, no? Did I? Oh, my book. So I use the phrase linchpin often. In my mind, there may be a single question that will provoke a response, an intuitive knowing in you that sets the rest of this in motion, that really provides the catalytic reaction to what it is. And for Stuart, it was that question, what are you angry about? So my book is written around the subject of questions. I use questions to help people stimulate experience and reaction, to try to see which question might actually feel like the tip of the iceberg that is going to now pull everything together. Often it's an emotional question. It's about one of your strong feelings or senses, or sometimes it's about what's going on in your body. You know, the Chinese look at our bodies not the way that pathologists do. They look at the body's organs and relate them to emotions. As I said, Chinese medicine, the liver is associated with the anger, kidneys associated with fear, the breast is associated with love. And so these are often the questions. Somebody comes into me with an earache. I don't say, gee, do they have meningococcal infection or pneumococcal infection? I say, what don't they want to hear? And I ask them that question. That, to me, sometimes is how the linchpin is discovered. And then, if it resonates with the person, they may say nothing. And so that may not be the ideal question, but it's an exploration into that. And once found, then it often leads to a major unfolding. I think that's the time that we have. And I so much very enjoyed sharing this with you. I'll be in the back. I think my books are here. I have this other thing. By the way, I'll just show you, flash it. I don't have it here, but you can get it by signing up to my newsletter, but it's called The Slow Medicine Guide to Healthy Multitasking. Because and it does have the picture of what I was trying to show up there, which is this petal flower thing. And the idea is, whenever you choose to do something, try to connect as many of these 7 zone dots as possible. Instead of eating just great food, eat great food with people you love, with candles and flowers, in quiet. Go to the farmer's market and shake the hand of the farmer. Imbue all the substances, all the experiences you have with as many facets and touch as many of these elements as possible, and the activity will be that much more powerful. So that's the idea. Anyway, thank you again. Fantastic.